Well, welcome to this talk. Now, I wanted to give a bit of feedback on a few videos we've done recently. We've looked at a video on ivermectin, and some people are suggesting it might be good for treating some cancers. And we also looked at another drug, fenbendazole, and some people say it might be useful for treating some cancers. No large-scale clinical trials have been done on it, so we are largely at the level of anecdotal evidence, although we have suggested some pretty interesting, some might say impressive, pathophysiological pharmacodynamic mechanisms by which this effect could be occurring. And we've also talked about the right to try. Desperate people that are dying have the right to try whatever treatment they would like or whatever experience they want. And the analogy we used in the past, if they want to try some malt whiskey, then they can try some malt whiskey. You know, if someone's dying, they should be allowed to try what they want. But what I want to do in this is give you some feedback from your feedback. Now, of course, I'm not prescribing any drugs. I'm not recommending any treatment. This is purely an academic discussion, and you'll have your own ideas on it. And the feedback I'm going to give you from you is not evidence, it's not science, it's not saying that it works, but if it's ignored by mainstream researchers, in my view, they are negligent. If this, what I'm about to talk about now, is ignored by mainstream researchers, in my view, they are negligent. So let me give you some of your anecdotal reports. Now, of course, these could be made up. We don't know how real they are, but they're all there under the comments of the video, so they're in public domain. So Jay says this, talking about ivermectin. I'm a stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer survivor, 5.5 years now. Now that's pretty good. So someone who's got stage 4, that means it's all over the body, it's spread. But they've had that for 5.5 years. Mebendazole, ivermectin, atorvastatin, metformin. PSA, that's prostate-specific antigen, went from 1,900, which is massive. That means you've got prostate cancer basically all over the body. Went from 1,900 to undetectable for the past 4 years. So it's gone from 1,900 to undetectable. Oncologists couldn't care less I'm still alive. How can we get the word out faster? Disappointing from Jay's oncologist. Buzzy says this. My friend's dad had terminal bladder cancer and had months to live. He started taking ivermectin and now he's cancer-free within 6 months. Now, of course, Busy may not exist. I'm sure Busy does exist if you're watching. Does this constitute scientific evidence? Of course not. Is this material which should go on to proper clinical trials? Of course it is. Am I recommending any particular treatments? Absolutely, emphatically not. But it is quite interesting, isn't it? Because remember, this is a video for academic stimulation only. Dag says, we have the right to eat sugar, drink alcohol, smoke tobacco, etc. But oh no, don't take a drug we can't make money into. Interesting point of view. Trash Can says, I believe right to try should not apply only to terminal patients, but it's a start. So what Trash is saying there is, yes, terminal patients should have the right to try these treatments, but heck, anyone should be able to try what they want within reason, is the view expressed by Trash Can. Of course, I'm not expressing any opinion at all. I'm merely reporting what is in the comments. Little Red says this. And I get many tragic things like this. My wife just died of cancer, so our commiserations, we're very sorry. My wife just died of cancer. The doctors refused to give her ivermectin. To me, that's a clear right to try situation. Why didn't Little Red's wife have the right to try if she wanted to? Because tragically, she died anyway. What's wrong with the right to try? Rock says, whatever happened to your body? Not to be sarcastic, but I really mean that. And certain people are saying, my body, my choice. Not apparently when it comes to drugs that people can't make money out of. Then it's your body, someone else's choice. I find that outrageous. You can have your own view on it. Tech says, I first became aware of ivermectin in 1977 when I was working at a local feed mill. Farmers would mix in ivermectin, which came in 50-pound bags. 50-pound bags, that's like 20 kilos of ivermectin, in their cattle feed to keep the cows from getting worms. Since then, it has become a miracle. So this shows that ivermectin, we can get £50 bags that are cheap enough just to put a scoop into cattle feed. This can be made for essentially no cost. Essentially free. It would cost more to put it in bubble wrap strips than it would to manufacture the actual preparation itself. Now, Suzy says this about streptomycin, which is a drug for treating tuberculosis. My dad had TBs and the doctors were arguing because it hadn't been trialled. So at this stage there'd been no clinical trials, but Suzy's dad had tuberculosis. He said, I'm dead anyway, so I might as well try it. And he signed to give permission to have the streptomycin. He was the first test case for streptomycin, and he survived for another 60 years. So here we have, and presumably this is the reason that Suzy is with us now. Suzy's dad was taking an experimental drug called streptomycin, and it cured his tuberculosis, saved his life, and thankfully Suzy is with us now. Not saying all experimental drugs are as good as streptomycin, of course not, but it's an interesting anecdote. Joe says this, exactly why the heck should anyone lord it over desperate people? Couldn't agree more, Jose. Why should anyone lord it over desperate people? And these people are very often desperate. They should have the right to try, in my view, as was the previous, in his first incarnation, President Trump advocated. Trust says, of course you are correct. Can you imagine the mindset of someone who does not agree with this? Pure tyranny. Are we under tyrannical control because of what we are not allowed to try? Interesting point of view from Trust. Ilian said, government should not interfere with being born or dying. These experiences are right out of the hand of God. Now, moving on to the video we did on fenbendazole. Fenbendazole. Fenbendazole gave a friend 5 more years. She'd been directed to hospice. 30 days later, 100% cancer-free with fenbendazole. Now, what can we take from that? That's from Judy. Judy may or may not exist. This could be someone who's just making this up. Of course, it's just a comment on a YouTube video. But I don't believe that's the case. I believe Judy definitely believes what she's saying. And if there's any truth at all in what she's saying, this has to be investigated. And if professional investigators are not investigating this, I suggest that they are being negligent. Petrila says, I have high-grade DCIS, that stands for ductal carcinoma in situ, in the breast. In other words, breast cancer. I've been using fenbendazole and ivermectin for 6 months and have shrunk my tumour by over 1 centimetre. So we have 2 preparations here. Now, which one was doing the shrinking, of course, we don't know. It's always confusing when you've got 2 variables. But again, you would think that people that are charged with researching cancer in national bodies would think, good grief, we better look at that one, hadn't we? Lacry, and I'm not using the full names here because, but they are all in the comments. Lacry says, my husband is taking fenbendazole. He has glioblastoma, brain tumour. Stage 4 brain tumour. He was having terrible seizures until he started taking fenbendazole. He hasn't had one in 16 months. Quite incredible, if true. And I'm sure it is, quite incredible. Also now at 3 years with his terminal condition, he's outlived his 12-month prognosis massively. So he was taking lots of fits, they stopped. He was given 12 months to live, still alive, thankfully. We're delighted to learn, still alive at 3 years after. He remains well, the tumour simply isn't growing. And in the previous videos we did look at pharmacodynamic reasons why this might be the case. For example, we looked at the fact that the spindles that pull the chromosomes apart when the cells divide, they don't polymerise, those spindles don't form. And so the spindles don't form that pull the chromosomes into separate cells, so you can't get 2 separate cells from one cell, therefore you're not getting mitosis, you're not getting cell division, therefore obviously the tumour can't carry on growing because it depends on ongoing cell division. There is a pharmacodynamic, pathophysiological, biochemical rationale to this that should be, in my view, investigated. Ilfeli. Fenbendazole cured my dog's terminal squamous cell carcinoma. Now, quite a few people have had the pets cured, or believe they've had the pets cured. So fenbendazole cured my dog's terminal squamous cell carcinoma. Fantastic stuff. My dog had 2 months to live, presumably from a veterinary opinion. I gave her fenbendazole, and 2.5 years later, she's fine. So terminally ill dog, fine. 2.5 years later, delighted. Kenny says, my mum was given 6 months to live in March with pancreatic cancer. Refused all treatments and took 222 milligrams of fenbendazole 6 days a week. 8 months later is still healthy and tumour has not increased in size. Doctors not interested to know how this happened because she didn't want their treatments. So again, interesting anecdote, perhaps something that should be researched. Terry says, thank you. I had bladder cancer. I had surgery to remove the tumour. Did 6 BCG treatments, never had chemo or radiation. And I started taking fenbendazole. When I went back for my 18-month checkup, they thought it had come back. They found something in my bladder. They did biopsies. The biopsies came back negative. The surgeon saw them and asked them for them to be retested because he was convinced that what he saw were bladder cancer cells. Biopsies came back negative. And the biopsies, of course, are the definitive pathological diagnosis. I know that fenben has kept me cancer-free now for 2.5 years. Thank you for sharing this information. And also, I had a friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer, had chemo, had radiation, and started taking fenbendazole, which means fenbendazole. His last checkup, he was told things are in remission, and he's singing again. Wonderful. There is an easy way to handle this. Dave said, my beloved dog was diagnosed 2 years ago with terminal cancer that had spread widely. She was given at best 6 months. Yet she is still with me and happy and healthy. I put her on fenben right after the diagnosis, and I give full credit to fenben for her still being here and enjoying a good quality of life. No real side effects I've noticed, perhaps some watery stools occasionally. So again, Dave's dog here given 6 months to live. 2 years later, dog is still alive and healthy. And now dogs, of course, are massively important. But if a treatment's working for a dog, is there a good chance it's working for humans? Well, we are really quite similar in a lot of ways. And a lot of veterinary drugs are human drugs anyway. So these are interesting stories, firstly because they're saving our beloved dogs, and also because the applicability to humans is significant and merits detailed further investigation. Exhibit says, last year I was diagnosed with a small grade 1 uterine cancer. This was done via biopsy, so taking a bit and having a look at it under the microscope. They gave me quite a bit of time between the diagnosis and my surgery for hysterectomy, removal of the uterus. They didn't seem to have a big sense of urgency, so I decided to see what I could do on my own to help this. So I started some natural therapies and also added Pancure, which is fenbendazole. About 2.5 months later, I had my surgery. They tested me a while on the table and also tested lymph nodes to make sure all is clear. My pathology report was all clear, no cancer at all. My pathology report was all clear, no cancer at all. I was the luckiest girl in the cancer centre that day. They surmised that the biopsy removed the cancer. That could be true, but what are the chances? It could be the initial biopsy was wrong, or that the fenbendazole worked, but who knows? Thank you for spreading the word. Now, normally when you're resecting a tumour, you resect the tumour and you do what you call a wide border excision. So if you've got a little tumour there, you take a much bigger bit from round about it to make sure you've got all the little bits. Because if there's a little straggle, a finger of tumour that you've missed, it can grow back. So the idea that it could be treated with a biopsy, to me is inconceivable, because when you take a biopsy, you're only taking part of the tumour. You're not taking the whole thing, and you're certainly not doing a wide border excision. So very impossible in my view to think that the biopsy could have cured the cancer. Janelle says, my cat had lymphoma, and my vet said almost 5 years ago now that she should be put down because he only had weeks to live. So cat with lymphoma, aggressive form of blood cancer. that he should be put down because he only had weeks to live. Took him home and researched and found out about fenbendazole, and he's doing good. I continue supplementing with fenbendazole. So cat with lymphoma, vet said put him down, he put him down straight away. 5 years later, still living a good life and giving pleasure to June, which of course is brilliant. Thank you for this is KRS saying to me, thank you for highlighting Fenben. 3 years ago I cured my 13-year-old dog, stage 4 liver cancer. Cancer grew to the size of a small lemon, and the dog was only given up to a month to live. I used high doses of Pancure, 5 milligrams in liquid form. Cancer was gone within 4 months. Now, the idea that something can take away a liver tumour, a liver secondary, almost certainly from the bowel, to me is amazing. When we have patients in with colorectal cancer, and that commonly metastasises to the liver. And when you do the scan and you see that the tumour's in the patient's liver, especially if there's multiple metastatic deposits in the liver, basically that is a terminal diagnosis, nearly always a terminal diagnosis. So here we have a dog cured of liver, what we assume are liver metastases. This is very, very impressive findings. This works well, and I will only use Pancure, that's fenbendazole, should I ever need it. Well, that's your opinion, KRS. Of course, we couldn't possibly comment. In May 2025, it's my dog's 17th birthday coming up. Absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. I'm delighted for you and your dog. None of you are giving the dogs names, unfortunately, but there you go. It's what we've got. Maggie says, I used it to clear my cancer. Bob says, I was diagnosed with small cell carcinoma of the left lung. That's one of the bronchogenic carcinomas. In November 2022, I was told I was terminal stage 4 as it already spread to my lymph nodes and pleura. That's the membranes around about the lung. I've been taking fenbendazole and ivermectin for a month now daily. Bloods from hospital yesterday were all clear, so no ill effects from them, which is brilliant. Richard says, I cured my lymphoma with fenbendazole, 222 milligrams for a week, then a week off for 2 months. So it sounds like Richard was taking 222 milligrams of fenbendazole a day for a week, and then a week off, then back on for a week. He did that for 2 months, gained all my weight back, feel great, haven't been back to the doc in 2 years. Now, these are anecdotal reports. Scientifically, they comprise essentially no evidence at all, but they are really what I would classify as qualitative research. They are people's qualitative experiences. And the thing about qualitative research is it can be used, and in this case, in my view, should be used as a basis for proper quantitative clinical trial-based evaluations. And in fact, with this, we wouldn't even need a pharmaceutical company to put up the $50 million for a randomised double-blind controlled trial, because we could actually collect retrospective data. If people had the right to try, they could try these drugs, and we could look at them over a long period of time. We could build up national cohorts of tens of thousands of patients in no time at all, because we're losing people all the time. We're losing dogs all the time from cancers. This data could be collected on humans and animals. And then we can hand it over to our statisticians, and the statisticians can tell us mathematical truth based on these potential prospective observations. This could be done. In my view, it should be done. Unfortunately, it is not being done. Let me know why you think, why not, but for now, as always, thank you for watching.
We now know ivermectin would have cured COVID in very ill people.
Σήμερα, 3 νέα αμοιβαία κεφάλαια από την Εθνική Τράπεζα φέρνουν τον κόσμο των επενδύσεων στα μέτρα σου. Με ευρεία διασπορά της επένδυσης και επαγγελματική διαχείριση, επενδύεις αξιόπιστα, επιλέγοντας τη λύση που ανταποκρίνεται στους στόχους που εσύ θέτεις. Αυτή είναι η Εθνική μας Τράπεζα. Αυτή είναι η Τράπεζα σήμερα.
Και αυτά τα Χριστούγεννα μια μικρή κίνηση δίνει μεγάλη χαρά. Με κάθε σκανάρισμα της κάρτας Lidl Plus, η Lidl Ελλάς προσφέρει 10 λεπτά στο χαμόγελο του παιδιού, στηρίζοντας το πρόγραμμα υποστήριξης ευάλωτων οικογενειών. Σκάναρε την ψηφιακή σου κάρτα Lidl Plus και βοήθησε κι εσύ. Lidl, στο δρόμο για ένα καλύτερο αύριο.
We now know ivermectin would have cured COVID in very ill people. It's been a number of studies which are positive, yet Fauci went on and lied and said it was toxic and dangerous horse only. And I think that probably led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, because everybody I've talked to who used it, nobody has had a death from it. In very ill people. It's been a number of studies which are positive, yet Fauci went on and lied and said it was toxic and dangerous horse only. And I think that probably led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, because everybody I've talked to who used it, nobody has had a death from it. And I myself used it on 2 patients who were really ill after they'd had everything else but didn't want to go to hospital, and they responded to it. So I know from personal experience it works. So the same government wouldn't let you have that won't let you have this. So why won't they let you have things that we know are very simple, safe and effective? I mean, ivermectin is unbelievably low toxicity. It's
one of the world's safest drugs, isn't it, really? I mean, safer than ibuprofen or paracetamol or acetaminophen.
Far safer. I mean, it's given to millions of people around the world and saves the lives, not only lives, but the eyesight. It's said to save 2 million people a year from going blind from the filaria.
Yeah. And yet has antiviral properties. And should we mention now potential anti-cancer properties, seeing we're talking about...
Well, I think the fact that there's been publications on it. I mean, I recently reviewed an enormous one looking at how it could be an anti-cancer agent. And even I was getting a little bit tired because there were so many mechanisms it could actually give you some anti-cancer activity. This is something that I'm very familiar with, because I did a lot of work with thalidomide at Celgene, developing lenalidomide and pomalidomide, which, that's why I'm really delighted to say, because there was a big company behind that, we got those on the market. But if it was a small company, they would probably just have been pushed away. But lenalidomide's number 1 for myeloma now, even on the NHS. I mean, it's been number 1 use worldwide for several years, but even the NHS means it's first line treatment for myeloma. It's made an incredible difference. The reason I mention this with ivermectin is that we couldn't believe how many pathways lenalidomide interfered with. And to the point where the company who was funding us to do all this basic research said, stop doing it. You're finding too many ways it interferes with things, and the regulatory authorities don't like that.
It is
your own conclusion. At any rate, lenalidomide and ivermectin have tremendous similarities in they hit so many pathways, which I believe is why both of these drugs can be administered at non-toxic doses with significant anti-cancer activity, and that is an absolute fact established with lenalidomide, because of it's been approved for myeloma and lymphoma worldwide, over 200 countries. So an absolute fact. I strongly suspect ivermectin would pass all those tests too.
And as well as that, these can be used as well as conventional approaches to cancer treatment. This is as well as radiotherapy, potentially, as well as chemotherapy.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about using these drugs, even though they actually work well by themselves, you're actually making it more likely they will respond to other treatments, because you're patching up the sieves that the other drugs don't deal with. You know, they get rid of 80% of the cancer, then it starts dividing again and goes through the holes that the chemo will never reach. So that's why I think it's so important to add all this in at the same time. And then, because there's zero toxicity, these drugs, as lenalidomide has shown, you can give that for years. Right. And the fantastic thing about that is when you get resistant to it eventually, sometimes 5 years, you can add in the pomalidomide, which is so similar, and it will take over and gain control of the cancer. I mean, to us, this is just unthinkable of how the mechanisms are, but it happens, and it's happened in several anti-cancer drugs now, where there's sequential changes to the index drug.
Just because it sounds too good to be true doesn't mean it's not true by any means.
Exactly.
So are these new versions of thalidomide now non-teratogenic?
That's very interesting. This was the reason they wouldn't let us do this thalidomide. Yeah. I applied to the MRC and the Wellcome Trust and the CRC UK, whatever it was at the time. They all turned down because of my application, because I had actually seen patients benefit so dramatically on thalidomide. I said, we mustn't chuck the baby away with the bathwater. They all turned down my grants on the grounds that we cannot get involved with this. It causes birth defects. And I said, look, I'm an oncologist. Every drug I use causes birth defects. It's not stupid enough to give them to pregnant women. And it's very easy to do that too. Because of its origin, the lenalidomide is very similar to thalidomide. It has the same limitations, but it's not a bad limitation. It's an oral drug you take every day for a month. So you just can't get more than 1 month without a negative pregnancy test if you're a woman or a man who's breeding too. I mean, it's just the way they do it. But interestingly, in practice, we know lenalidomide doesn't have that birth defect, but we just have to pretend that it does, but it doesn't. Yeah.
It's reasonable to be cautious about it.
Yeah, that's a reasonable precaution, as opposed to many of the others that have been taken.
So going back to the vaccines that you and others have developed here, have you got a company that's up and running and saying, yeah, we can make these for you now, Gus?
Oh, Imodulin is the company. Imodulin is the company making the IMM 101.
And they're ready to go.
There's a chart there. This is one we published in 2016. It is a very simple, multi-center, randomized trial in which the standard treatment at the time for pancreatic cancer was gemcitabine. So all we did was randomize to IMM or a placebo. In fact, not all the places use placebo because it's obvious if you have a little intradermal injection.
Yeah.
And this is what you're looking at, is survival. I mean, it is unbelievably effective survival, because at the time we used gemcitabine, it was only used for patients who weren't fit enough for the new, more toxic regimens that come in. So that the survival is even more important, because the standard patient we treated was so poorly, and yet we had this fantastic improvement. If you gave IMM and gem, the survival was far superior to gemcitabine alone. I'd just like to add, though, that one other thing that I can never ever tire of saying is that when I was asked why this immunotherapy worked so well by a guy in America when we presented it, he said, why does none of the other immunotherapies work in pancreatic cancer? And I said, well, this is probably the first trial where we insisted that the vitamin D levels had to get into the normal range. He couldn't believe this. He said, I've never heard of this, and I'm a very big pancreatic trial cancer person. His name was Daniel von Hoff. And he was quite, he was huffing and puffing about this. But he phoned me 3 months later to say he'd put somebody on a study to check. He'd done 4,000 patients on different trials over 2 to 3 decades. And he came back and he said not a single patient responded to a single chemotherapy agent if they had a low vitamin D level. He was absolutely knocked out. And the really good ones that they put down to the later agents as they came along in the trials, that the responses were purely correlated with the fact these rare patients had high vitamin D levels. So with this, it's one of the things I've always said. We're going to stimulate the innate immune system. You must have a good vitamin D level first.
Which makes perfect sense, because you've got vitamin D receptors in every type of white blood cell. You've got vitamin D genomic expression that depends on vitamin D dependent genomic expression in every type of white blood cell. It seems fairly obvious. Interestingly, though, that the patients with the high levels of vitamin D in the blood, did they actually do better? Was there like a dose response there?
Yes, there was. He confirmed that. He said he couldn't believe it. I mean, he spent 30 years doing this and hadn't realised it was that simple. Well, I must confess that we took a while before we realised that the difference between a responder and a non-responder was the vitamin D. We looked at virtually everything else, and we only cottoned on to vitamin D when we were able to use the hospital's vitamin D testing service that they use for mothers and babies relative to rickets. And as soon as we could do it for adults, we found that it was the same. The only people who responded really well to the vaccines, including the immune modulators like IMM, were the people who had good, healthy vitamin D levels. It also highlighted that the NHS's idea of a normal vitamin D is really too low.
At least in this pathological situation.
In a pathological situation, because vitamin D is too low in the general population, because this is a population that is very white-skinned and exists indoors most of the time, so it doesn't get a chance. And then people who have got darker skins, it is far, far worse. So that they definitely need supplementation.
It's interesting. So for years you'd known that some patients respond to your chemotherapeutic regimes and some don't. And the reason that the non-responders didn't respond is because they were low on vitamin D. It was that simple.
Yeah, it is that simple.
That's so obvious once you know. But so what sort of levels do you like to titrate up to for chemotherapy?
I like to get it over 100 nanomoles per litre. Yeah. The NHS normal is 50 nanomoles per litre. So it's far too low.
Yeah, so over 100. But that's still only about sort of 35, 40 nanograms per mil, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah, and you know the upper limit of normal is usually 200 to 220, so it's nowhere near toxic.
No,
absolutely nowhere near. And
even then, in your career, have you seen a case of vitamin D induced hypercalcemia?
It's very difficult to say. My direct question is no. But I have heard of it occurring in children where the mothers are given ludicrous high doses because the kidneys can't take it. You've got to be very careful giving vitamin D supplementation in renal failure. And certain people with rare phosphate genetic pathway abnormalities. Apart from that, you normally just pee it out. If any excess, you have a thermostat, and once the vitamin D goes up, I mean, there's some people you can give grams to nearly, and they'll never go above 120.
Interesting. So even though it's a fat-soluble vitamin, because traditionally I would teach that it's water-soluble vitamins that are urine excreted. But here we have a fat-soluble vitamin that's actually urine excreted. You can test the urine and find high levels of vitamin D in the urine if you give large amounts. It's just it just seems complete no-brainer not to do that. Is this done now in cancer centres around the country? Is vitamin D replete?
It's slowly, but I just cannot believe the number of people I get referred for second opinion. You know, will you please see this person? They've been on all the right treatment, they're not responding. Have you got any sort of magic, this, that and the other? And I find they've never had their vitamin D measured from, big cancer centres, which I won't name. And I measure the vitamin D and it's really low, and so that's the first thing I do, boost it up. And I thought that should not be my job.
No,
it should.
You shouldn't get to a professor to do that. The junior should do that.
Well, exactly. Anyone comes near me should have a very good vitamin D level. It's not my job to point out you've just had a year of treatment that's a total waste of time because you've got a low vitamin D level. It's unbelievable.
And the human suffering and the financial cost involved in that. It's just unbelievable.
But even hospitals with very good reputations are not getting vitamin D measured in a lot of their patients.
Yeah, incredible.
In fact, the people who do push for it are actually the dietitians.
Yes.
Not the doctors, not the oncologists.
Yeah.
The oncologists will say, well, there's no good evidence. Of course there's good evidence. They just never ever bother to do the research on it.
So two very natural things: the IMN, which is the mycobacterium attenuated bacterial preparation; the vitamin D, perfectly natural, and getting those two things right has got this massive benefit. A warm welcome to this talk.
Σκέψου λίγο. Αν μπαίνεις με πλατούλα στο νερό.
Πώς αλλιώς.
Αν όταν κάθεσαι λες.
Ω παλάκια.
Και όταν σε βλέπουν σου παραχωρούν τη θέση τους.
Παρακαλώ, καθίστε.
Καθίστε.
A warm welcome to this talk. Now, I want to look at repurposed drugs for cancer today. This is a remarkably important topic that's simply not being covered in any mainstream outlets or significantly covered at all, really. Why is it important? Because we've had problems with... A warm welcome to this talk. Now, I want to look at repurposed drugs for cancer today. This is a remarkably important topic that's simply not being covered in any mainstream outlets or significantly covered at all, really. Why is it important? Because we've had problems with cancer, of course, for hundreds of years. Certainly for the last decades, in my working experience, we've seen huge amounts of cancer. Secondly, because cancer does seem to be increasing, especially in the younger demographic. Thirdly, because healthcare provision is not always what we'd like it to be. And some parts of the world, people simply can't afford expensive, sophisticated healthcare provision such as radiotherapy and chemotherapy. So lots of reasons why we need to do more for cancer than we're doing now. Now, I want to look at a couple of papers today, but I want to start off with this one here. This is from the International Journal of Molecular Science, repositioning of anthelmintic drugs, more on that in a minute, for the treatment of cancers of the digestive system. Now, this paper does take digestive system cancers particularly, but we'll be talking about other ones as we go as well. Now, that's this paper here. Talks about tumours of the digestive system, which are really remarkably common, but their incidence continues to increase. And sadly, we've been talking to cancer specialists who are seeing an increase in younger demographics of late as well. The process of discovering, validating novel and effective drugs against these malignancies is lengthy and costly, and very often they're not very effective, and very often they are phenomenally expensive as well. So we could do with alternatives. So drug repositioning or drug repurposing is finding new uses for approved drugs. So these are drugs which are approved already, sometimes approved for human uses, other times approved for veterinary uses. Now, veterinary use is being used as a disparaging term. Horse paste comes to mind. But of course, the drug that we're talking about there, ivermectin, we don't want to use paste, of course. We want to use drug that if you're going to take a drug orally, it's got to be one that's designed for oral use. But the point is the ivermectin that you give to horses and the ivermectin you give to humans is the same molecule. You know, when your dog gets sick, you give them amoxicillin. That's exactly the same as you would take if it's a particular type of infection. The vets know which ones to give for which infections, but they're the same antibiotics as we use in humans. We are all mammals. The drugs work in very similar ways. Not always the same, of course, but the drugs are molecules. And whether it's for a drug that's used for veterinary purposes or human purposes, it's actually the same molecule. Now, of course, we can only take drugs that are approved and don't take any drugs at all based on what I say. This is entirely for educational purposes. But I don't like the way drugs have been disparaged as if animals have some sort of substandard set of molecules that they're given, whereas human drugs are somehow better molecules. No, a drug is a drug. It's a molecule. Amoxicillin is amoxicillin. Ivermectin is ivermectin. It's a molecule. They're the same. Anyway, having got that point out of the way, sometimes these drugs are approved for animals, sometimes for humans. Provides the opportunity to expedite promising anti-cancer agents into clinical trials. Now, this is another problem here, clinical trials. So, I'm going to show you later on about people who might want to take drugs that haven't been through clinical trials. Not that we're advocating that, but some people might want to do that. Now, clinical trials have their limitations. And the idea that everything has got to be a randomised, double-blind, controlled clinical trial is actually... most of the treatments that we use are not based on this level of evidence. And these trials aren't always well conducted. And the trials that are conducted are sometimes idiosyncratically selected. So the idea that this is somehow some gold standard. Yeah, okay, it is a gold standard, but it's not the only standard. There are other ways of collecting evidence through mass participation, for example. I'll show you what I mean when we give a specific example shortly. Anyway, now these drugs are anthelmintics. Now you do see antihelmintics as well, and you do see different spellings. The reason I'm using this is because that's the one that's on this particular paper. Now the helminths are worms, and these worms infect the gastrointestinal tract primarily, roundworms and tapeworms. So the helminths are these worms, and these anthelmintic drugs are drugs used to combat those, but it turns out they've got a wide variety of mechanisms of action as well, some of which have got very promising anti-cancer properties. Some of these medicines, according to this paper, showed anti-tumour activities, and again you can spell tumour with a U. We put a U in there in the UK. That's the spelling that's in this paper, so that's the one I've kept. And these drugs have shown ability to target key oncogenic signals, transduction pathways. Now, a transduction pathway is just a way that a message goes basically normally through a cell. But in this case, it's oncogenic, one which will start cancer. But if these can be disrupted, the cancer won't start. First group here we want to talk about, benzimidazoles. The key thing is the end in azoles. Some have been successfully tested for the treatment of gastrointestinal, liver and pancreatic cancers from this paper. So mebendazole is the first one. Now, I've been using mebendazole for years and years and years for treating worms. Very common, very safe. Personally, I've never come across any adverse reactions to it. I've taken it myself on several occasions when I've been exposed to wormy type infections working in the tropics and less hygienic parts of the world. Very common. Now, this blocks tubulin polymerization. I'm not going to go into all these mechanisms, but basically inside a cell, that you probably know you have cells, and you have the outer cell membrane, and you have the nucleus. Now, in the cells, there's lots and lots of microtubules that give the cell structure. You often don't see these under a microscope. Microscopic tubules that give the cell structure, and and these are made of tubulin. This is the protein they're made of. And if you stop these polymerizing, if you stop them sticking together into long columns, then you can't make these microtubules. So you can't make the cells. You can't make the cancer cells, which of course is brilliant. Seem to inhibit cell growth and invasion of ascites cell lines derived from primary gastric tumours. So in other words, these are malignant cells taken from the fluid in people's abdomens, but that originate from gastric tumours. It works against those, whether used alone or in combination with chemotherapeutics. Now, this is the advantage of these drugs. Many of these drugs, these anthelmintic drugs, because they're very safe. Okay, no drug's completely safe, but because they tend to be safe, you can use them on their own, at reasonably high doses sometimes, or you can use them in combination with existing protocols. You can use it as well as. So it's not saying you should try this as opposed to conventional therapy. You know, why not try both together? Would be the way of thinking. what we really need is to get all these drugs looked at and get the oncologists to work out, and the pharmacologists working out which ones are the best ones. These are all the ones looked at in this paper. I mean, it's a huge variety looked at in this paper. All these different drugs. These are all anti-parasitic or anthelmintic drugs. You might have come across that one, for example. These are all drugs of this category. And we really need to find out just what they do and which ones are particularly good at what. But many of them do seem to have a remarkably broad a broad spectrum of action, because they have a very wide variety of pharmacodynamic effects, apparent ways of working. Treatment was also successful in colorectal cell cancer lines, and this is interesting. Showed no cytotoxic activity, in other words, did not kill cells, against 3 cell lines with non-malignant phenotypes. In other words, normal cells. So we seem to have compounds here which are killing cancer cells while having no activity against normal cells. Sounds too good to be true, really, but this is what this research is certainly intimating towards. Induced remission of lung and lymph node metastases. So when the cancers had spread to the lung and the lymph nodes, they were still effective. So when the cancer is spread, you can't cut it out surgically because it's everywhere. You need a systemic approach, and these seem to offer that possibility. And also some efficacy in patients with refractory metastatic colon cancer. Refractory means it doesn't respond to treatment. Metastatic means it's already started in the colon. Anti-cancer properties in the treatment of hepatocellular carcinoma, that is liver cancer. Now, here's another paper here. Emergent perspectives on the antiparasitic mebendazole as a repurposed drug for the treatment of brain cancer. So here we see a possibility that mebendazole might also be useful for brain cancers. Again, these things really need looked at in detail. So in other words, I'm just putting that in to show it's not just gastrointestinal cancers, it's just this paper's talking about it. Albendazole, see again, it ends in azole. Cytostatic, so in other words, the cells didn't carry on dividing. Effects on human cancer cell lines. Potential anti-cancer agent also for the treatment of hepatocellular carcinoma, that's the liver cancer. Some efficacy against pancreatic cell lines. Positive mice studies, some early human studies as well. So clearly what we need is more human studies. Now, ivermectin, this paper does talk about ivermectin. It talks about it in terms of colorectal cancer and gastric cancer, and in vitro and in vivo. So there is some evidence that it's working effectively in the living situation. And ivermectin really is a promising drug which needs to be analysed more for this, and basically needs to be tried by people that need it in a controlled situation. Ivermectin, a potential anti-cancer drug derived from an anti-parasitic drug, is this paper here. Now, we have looked at this before. That's this paper here. Work done surprisingly mostly in China. Maybe they have less external influences on what they can study and what they can't study. Ivermectin induced different programmed cell deaths. For example, that one's called apoptosis. Now, this has found potential efficacy in breast cancer, digestive system cancer. This is all ivermectin. Gastric cancer, hepatocellular cancer, urinary system cancer, renal cell cancer, prostate cancer, hematological cancer, leukemia. Basically everything. Reproductive system, cervical, ovarian, brain glioma, glioblastoma, which is a very malignant brain tumour, respiratory system cancer, nasopharyngeal carcinoma, lung cancer, and melanoma. Now, this does sound like it's an awful lot, but there does seem to be a lot of different mechanisms of action that these drugs, in the case of ivermectin, of course, derive from natural bacterial products. Now, just to be clear, I'm not advocating taking any drugs. I don't prescribe drugs. This is way beyond what I can do. This is just purely an educational discussion video, but it is based on peer-reviewed literature, therefore needs to be taken seriously. Is humanity really missing a trick here? Yes, I think it is. Now, under the last time Donald Trump was president, he had this thing. I don't know what the legal status of this turned out to be. I don't think it was carried on, but President Donald J. Trump to sign right to try legislation for fulfilling the promise he made to expand healthcare opportunities for terminal Americans. So if people are dying anyway, people who are terminally ill should not have to go from country to country to seek a cure. I want to give them a chance right here at home. So what this paper is saying, and I would hope this is going to be resurrected under the new Trump administration, what this is saying is that if someone's dying and they want to try particular treatment, then why the heck shouldn't they be allowed to? Why should we be in a situation where someone who's dying wants to try ivermectin for their cancer, say? What on earth gives the state the power to say, no, you can't try that? I feel that legislation around the world should be changed to this, to give people the opportunity to try what the heck they want. You know, if someone's dying and they think, you know, I just think I quite fancy a large glass of single malt whiskey from the Isle of Lewis, then flipping heck, let them have it. Let them try whatever they want. And that goes for drugs that could potentially alleviate their condition. Potentially. Why not try it? And as people choose to try these drugs, we can build up huge amounts of evidence prospectively. So someone with a terminal condition may say, well, you know, I've got advanced prostate cancer. I would like to try taking ivermectin alongside my traditional treatments. Or some people might say, well, my traditional treatments have failed. I've now got metastatic prostate cancer. I'd like to try ivermectin on its own, or ivermectin with fenbendazole or some other drug. And then that data can be prospectively collected. And the people that chose not to have that drug, they would be the control group. And would end up by collecting huge amounts of data in very small amounts of time, rather than running phenomenally expensive, often biased, randomized controlled trials. Why don't we do that? We could collect 1 million pieces of data from combinations of countries in no time at all. Then we would know. And the potential for treatments for cancer at essentially zero cost would be available. Now I'm just going to close with another quick message from Dr. Kathleen Ruddy. Now we did look at a video clip from Dr. Ruddy just recently, and she talked about a patient with basically terminal metastatic prostate cancer who basically dramatically improved, essentially was cured, taking ivermectin. Let's listen to another account from her now, and then we'll close. For now, thank you for watching.
A second patient crossed my path. A guy in his 70s who had been losing weight for a year and a half, 40 pounds, not vaccinated, 40-pound weight loss, smoker, drinker, all he does is fish. And he could no longer swallow, and he could hardly talk. And so I got on the phone with him, and I said, Eddie, you know, tell me a little bit about your history and so forth. He knew someone with prostate cancer who had taken ivermectin, had cured himself from prostate cancer with that. So Eddie began taking ivermectin. I have no idea what the dosing was. He was just taking it. And I gave him some advice about diet and, you know, try and get the weight back on and so on and so forth. Within a couple of weeks, he sounded stronger. He sounded stronger. He could swallow. He had gained 6 pounds. His voice was better. Followed him for the next couple of weeks, maybe another month or so, and I said, Eddie, we need to get a scan. He doesn't have insurance, he doesn't like doctors, whatever. He had been diagnosed in that interval with 2 esophageal tumors, unresectable. Surgeons wouldn't go near it. The doctor said, well, we'll give you chemo and radiation, and Eddie said, no, you're not. So he takes his ivermectin, maybe about 6 weeks later. I said, Eddie, you need to get a scan. I had to argue with Eddie to get a scan. We got the scan. No tumors. Gone. Gone. The problem was that he had sold his fishing boat. That was the biggest problem. He was getting better. His tumor was gone. Now he needed to go out and buy another fishing boat. That was the second patient. I was like, well, now that's interesting.